tell you what, should we film me whooping Sting?
Yes,
that would be good, wouldn't it?
That would be great.
One of the singers slept with two other bandmates. Another set of brothers stopped talking after 40 years in the same group.
I mean, he's just been so unpleasant for 10 years. I just feel now like I really don't care if I never see him, you know?
But what happens when the chemistry that creates iconic music is the very thing that tears a band apart? Bands that not only clashed on stage, but also fought battles behind the curtain. These events broke apart friendships, families, and even careers. And where better to begin than with a band feud so intense, things even got physical. I'm talking about none other than the legendary Aerosmith. Aerosmith's climb to rock and roll stardom may have looked effortless from the outside, but beneath the fame, tension and rivalry brewed within the band. The lineup of Steven Tyler, Joe Perry, Tom Hamilton, Joey Kramer, and Brad Whitford brought them fame and fortune, yet the same chemistry that fueled their iconic sound was also a volatile force, and one that eventually spiraled out of control. By 1979, years of personal and creative clashes had worn down their once strong bonds, pushing the group toward a breaking point. The final straw came not from the band members themselves, but from a confrontation between their families. During a heated argument at the studio, Perry's wife and Hamilton's wife got into a fight that quickly turned physical, and by the end of it, one had thrown a glass of milk at the other, which only escalated the tensions to a brand new high. When Tyler and the other members of the band discovered the aftermath, frustration boiled over and Tyler directed his anger at Joe Perry. It was here the band's internal conflict would erupt, with accusations and resentment taking center stage. However, the rift would go deeper than one single incident. Joe Perry had long been growing distant from the band's chaotic lifestyle and constant arguments, and decided to call it quits. Perry's departure was a decision driven by exhaustion and a desire to break free from the pressures and dysfunction that surrounded the band. In the years that followed Joe Perry's exit, Aerosmith would struggle as the unity and intensity that had defined them faded. Though the bandmates eventually mended their differences, this era would leave long-lasting scars. Sadly, not every band manages to mend the rifts that come with fame and creative clashing. Some fallouts leave wounds that are too deep to heal, and UB40 is a prime example. UB40's story begins with the Campbell brothers, Robin and Ali, a group of friends who formed the band in Birmingham in 1978. After the formation of the band, it would not take long before hits like Red Red Wine had propelled them to global fame. But as the band rose to the top, tension simmered beneath the surface, with the brothers' ambitions and egos clashing as their success grew. Years of creative and personal disagreements began to fracture the group, and in 2008, Ali Campbell, the band's lead singer, stunned fans by leaving the group. Ali had claimed that he was fed up with the band's management and financial disputes, but his departure left the rest of the group reeling. In an effort to move forward, the rest of the band took over, and UB40 continued without Ali. But things were far from resolved. Shortly after leaving, Ali began his own band and called it UB40, featuring Ali Campbell. This would lead to a furious feud over the band's name and legacy. What followed would be a bitter legal and personal battle that had split not only the band, but also the Campbell family itself. The brothers became entangled in lawsuits, each one fighting to claim the UB40 name and legacy as their own. Fans were forced to choose sides, while the family fractured under the weight of accusations and betrayal, along with greed. The feud grew so intense that Ali didn't even attend his parents' funerals, and even as their brother Duncan's health would go downhill over the years, the two never reconciled.
You know, the saddest thing is that he's never spoken to us since. I think there's an amount of bitterness, you know, because when he left, he didn't have the success that he thought he was going to have.
The same can be said in the case of Rage Against the Machine. In the heart of the 1990s, Rage emerged as a seismic force in rock and roll music, but what the public didn't see was the very passion that fueled their artistry also sowed the seeds of their undoing, leading to a tumultuous breakup in the year 2000. The split was announced by lead singer Zach De La Rocha, who cited a complete breakdown in the band's decision-making process, particularly following a dramatic incident at the MTV Video Music Awards, where bass player Tom Comerford caused a scene.
Madman. I wanted to bring the whole thing down, but they didn't move.
in my mind, I visualize.
At the event, Rage Against the Machine's video for Sleep Now in the Fire was up against Limp Bizkit's Break Stuff, which ended up winning. Feeling that Rage's video was more deserving, Comerford ignored advice from his bandmates and decided to climb up on a piece of the set.
I wanted to bring the whole thing down, but they didn't move.
After this, internal conflicts only continued to escalate as the band members argued over trivial matters. Tom Morello would later reflect on the chaotic period, recalling how petty arguments spiraled into full-blown fistfights.
Rock bands are rock bands, you know what I mean? And they're made up of creative people who sometimes have differences, and sometimes those differences sort of outweigh the moment.
While Rage had tried to work things out, the members of Cream did everything in their power to tear the band apart. In the pantheon of rock legends, there are few bands that have burned as brightly and flamed out as spectacularly as Cream. Beneath the surface of their musical genius, there was a cauldron of rivalry and personal conflict that would ultimately consume the band from within. From the beginning, the chemistry that had made Cream sound so dynamic also sowed the seeds of discord. Baker and Bruce, two powerhouse personalities, were locked in a constant battle for supremacy. Their fierce egos clashed with alarming regularity. Eric Clapton, who had tried to play the role of peacemaker, found himself caught up in the crossfire, looking on as the band's creative potential devolved into a cacophony of arguments and personal attacks. The onstage battles became legendary, with Bruce cranking his amplifiers to ear-splitting levels in an attempt to drown out Baker's drumming, leading to the chaotic performances where the music was drowned out by ego.
Our first sort of talk-through rehearsal at Ginger's house in Neasden, and those two had a sort of argument right away, because Jack had done an interview talking about it and sort of spilled the beans and let the cat out of the bag, and Ginger was upset about that, and so there was it went along the lines of, well, there you go, you've done it again.
As tensions mounted, the band's internal struggles began to overshadow their creative output. Clapton's growing frustration became obvious as he realized that instead of crafting music together, they were competing against each other for dominance. By May of 1968, the inevitable conclusion had loomed large. The once promising supergroup prepared to call it quits. Their last concerts were a farewell to a partnership that had promised so much, yet succumbed to the relentless forces of rivalry and pride. Another band that saw a similar fate was the Police. This band's meteoric rise was as much fueled by tension as it was by talent. Sting, Stuart Copeland, and Andy Summers had clashed on a constant basis, with their notorious feuds often spilling out into the public eye. They were one of the biggest bands of the early 1980s, but the relentless infighting had threatened to unravel them long before their final days. By the time they recorded Synchronicity, the animosity had grown so intense they couldn't even stand to be in the same room with each other, and each member had to record their parts separately. Sting became increasingly frustrated by compromise and the relentless battles with bandmates, and began seeing the band as an obstacle to his own ambitions. When the group played Shea Stadium in 1983, Sting had mentally checked out, deciding that it was his peak moment and his cue to pursue a solo career. An attempt at a reunion in 1986 quickly reignited old tensions, with the same ego clashes and resentment driving them apart once again. They had met as bandmates, not lifelong friends, and once the initial spark faded, nothing held them together outside of fame.
Okay. I'll tell you what, should we film me whooping Sting?
Yes,
That would be good, wouldn't it?
And before we move on, if you're enjoying the video, make sure that you subscribe to the channel right now, because you never want to miss another great video like this one in the future. Also, consider buying me a cup of coffee. I'm really thirsty, and coffee keeps me going and making these videos for you. Speaking of fractured relationships, Motley Crue also had its fair share. Just like most of the bands on this list, Motley Crue's story is one of skyrocketing success, fueled by chaos, ego, and relentless tension that ultimately tore the band apart. By the time their 1989 album Dr. Feelgood had topped the charts, members were entangled in brutal battles with addiction and spiraling conflicts that constantly threatened their unity. Nikki Sixx's near-fatal overdose in 1987 had forced the band into rehab, but even after their supposed recovery, the dysfunction had only simmered below the surface. Each member struggled with intense personal issues, with Sixx's overdose only being one part of a more dark pattern that had plagued them all. In 1992, the simmering hostility boiled over as Vince Neil was pushed out amidst creative and personal clashes, marking a turning point that had sent the band into a chaotic period of lineup changes and diminishing success.
The way we had the band going was like everybody had 25% input in everything. And so 75% voted me out. You know, they're great guys. You know, they just had to do what they felt they had to do.
Neil's absence left a noticeable void. While John Corabi stepped in as the new frontman, he had failed to capture the chemistry that had originally defined Motley Crue. Other members' personal troubles worsened during this time, particularly drummer Tommy Lee's high-profile legal issues and jail time, which had only magnified the growing rift among them. When Motley Crue announced their final tour in 2014, signing a legally binding cessation of touring agreement to solidify the breakup, it was an attempt to close this tumultuous chapter with dignity. But even that would be short-lived. The 2019 release of The Dirt, however, reignited fan interest, drawing the members back together, and despite years of friction that had proven impossible to resolve. One band that had never gotten to recover from their tumultuous relationship was the Mamas and the Papas. Although they may have been known for dreamy, mellow harmonies, the band's offstage dynamics were anything but smooth. John Phillips, the band's founder and primary songwriter, had struggled with maintaining control, especially as Cass Elliot, otherwise known as Mama Cass's charm and vocal presence began to captivate the public eye. From the beginning, Phillips had misgivings about Elliot joining the band, partly due to her weight, which he feared may impact the group's image. But when Elliot's voice became one of the band's defining features, Phillips' insecurity grew. Beneath the music, romantic entanglements created deep divisions. Phillips's wife Michelle and the group's other female vocalist had a secret affair with singer Denny Doherty, and when Phillips discovered it, the powder keg exploded. According to Michelle, Phillips never caught the two sleeping together. He did, however, catch them in a compromising situation. In the singer's words, "John didn't actually find us, but he did come downstairs and I was sitting on Denny's bed in my nightgown, feeding him candies." On the other hand, Mama Cass was also in love with Doherty, and the revelation of this affair with Michelle left her devastated. The affair's fallout became quite public knowledge and led to the creation of I Saw Her Again, a hit inspired by the turmoil. Despite all of the success, the betrayal would continue to weigh heavily, with John eventually attempting to remove Michelle from the group. Fan backlash would force her to return, making it clear that John's authority over the group was not as absolute as he had hoped. Adding to the turmoil, the band's hard-partying lifestyle would amplify the cracks, and they often drank and used substances before recording sessions, blurring the lines between personal grievance and professional commitment.
When we took drugs, we were taking psychedelics, and we were looking for a better place. We were trying to expand our minds. And
Elliot and Phillips frequently clashed over creative control, as Elliot sought solo opportunities and a larger role beyond the group, sparking further friction with Phillips, who felt his grip on the band slipping away. Elliot's growing independence and influential social life had only intensified the situation, and her popularity as a host of major music industry figures had placed her in a position of power that Phillips found hard to tolerate. By 1969, the combination of strained relationships, personal ambitions, and unresolved conflicts had pushed the band to its breaking point. Their music had soared to great heights, but their intense, tangled personal lives ultimately proved to be too volatile for long-term unity.
demanding time of my life. But when I hear it, I'm overwhelmed with pride.
From your perspective, what were the key factors in the breakup of the group? Some would say premature breakup because you were still, it would seem, in full creative flower.
No, we weren't in full creative flower. We had exhausted the creativity at hand. And I think that it was unfortunate that there was just too much asked of us at that point.
Just like the Mamas and the Papas, Fleetwood Mac was also ruined due to the various romantic entanglements that occurred with its members. The band, which was already no stranger to lineup changes, reached a brand new level of instability with the addition of Christine McVie, Lindsey Buckingham, and Stevie Nicks. Although these new members brought undeniable talent, they also added layers of emotional complexity that would eventually consume the group. The relationships within Fleetwood Mac were a tangled mess. Buckingham and Nicks joined the band as a couple, but their relationship soon began to fracture under the pressures of fame and constant proximity. Their breakup did not stay contained with their personal lives, and it bled into their music, leaving tension simmering in the studio and on the stage. Meanwhile, the marriage between John and Christine McVie, both long-standing members, was also crumbling down. Watching each other in close quarters while going through a painful split had only intensified the group's emotional turmoil. After the split, tensions in Fleetwood Mac were already simmering, yet the band pressed on, pouring their emotions into the making of Rumors in 1977.
You wrote, among other things, Go Your Own Way and Secondhand News. What were you saying to Stevie?
Well, I think both of those are basically saying, hey, I'm resigned to whatever happens, but it's a damn shame. It's not what I want. And that, I think that's really about it, Actually, Secondhand News, at least it has a little bit of tongue-in-cheek humor in it, because it's basically saying, as a contingency, if you ever get lonely, I'm always willing to proposition you.
This album would become a commercial masterpiece, but unfortunately beyond the commercial success, each member was wrestling with personal drama. On one side, Nicks and Buckingham had ended their rocky relationship, leaving unresolved feelings and tension, and on the other hand, Fleetwood had recently remarried his wife Jenny Boyd after a brief separation, though that reunion would soon face marital strain. Amidst these fragile relationships, an unexpected bond developed between Nicks and Fleetwood. Both were reeling from the emotional weight of their recent heartbreaks, and in their vulnerability they found a connection. This complicated entanglement only heightened the already volatile atmosphere that surrounded the band, and what had begun as a professional collaboration became a whirlwind of personal entanglements that would ultimately shape Rumors. Beyond the romance, the band struggled with substance abuse, and that only fueled erratic behavior and deepened rifts. In such an environment, arguments became frequent and explosive, with personal and professional lines often blurred. Buckingham's intense perfectionism clashed with Nick's desire for autonomy and creativity, and Christine McVie, typically the band's peacemaker, found herself increasingly disillusioned and drained by the constant drama. As the years wore on, the weight of heartbreak, addiction, and conflict would grow to be unbearable. Though they had pushed through and continued to make music, the fractures of Fleetwood Mac were irreparable. And of course, this list would be incomplete without talking about the feud between members of Journey and Steve Perry. As Journey evolved in the late 1980s with albums like Raised on Radio, friction arose over the band's musical direction. Perry had aimed for a polished commercial sound, while other members, particularly Neil Schon, favored a harder rock style. This clash would create an environment that was full of tension. Perry's personal challenges, including health issues and a desire for independence, had also led him to distance himself from the band. As creative disagreements would escalate, emotional strain made collaborating increasingly difficult. Perry's decision to step back during the promotion of Trial by Fire marked the culmination of these unresolved conflicts. Years later, during their induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the atmosphere mixed nostalgia with unaddressed feelings. Schon had expressed a desire to reconnect, reflecting on how many past grievances seemed minor in hindsight. Despite the years apart, the deep respect and yearning for reconnection between Perry and the band remained evident. To wrap things up, let's look at one of Britain's most influential bands, the Smiths. Despite only having a brief 5-year existence, the band's journey was tumultuous from the beginning, as it lacked a consistent management structure and grappled with personal issues that strained relationships. The band's creative chemistry, which initially fueled their success, gradually morphed into an intense feud, particularly between frontman Morrissey and guitarist Johnny Marr. As the group released albums like Meat is Murder and The Queen is Dead, the pressure of their rising fame and relentless demands of touring began to take its toll. Marr's desire to explore collaborations outside of the band had clashed with Morrissey's need for a more insular, creative environment. This difference in division not only created friction, but also led to misunderstandings that exacerbated existing tension. Marr's exhaustion from the band's grueling schedule had prompted him to take a break. Unfortunately, this move would not be well received by other members and eventually escalated into his departure. Morrissey's insistence on covering 1960s pop songs would further alienate Marr, who felt this direction betrayed the band's unique identity. The lack of a managerial presence compounded the problems, and that left Marr to shoulder responsibilities that he was not prepared to handle at the age of 23. After the split, the intensity of their fallout became more pronounced during a lengthy legal battle over royalties. The dispute had turned bitter, with accusations flying and animosity brewing between the band's members. And despite the intense feud that marked their final years and led to a short-lived career as a band, the Smiths' legacy remains powerful, with their music resonating with new generations. If you enjoyed this video, you should subscribe to the channel right now. We're always putting out new content, and you never want to miss another video like this one in the future. Be sure to like the video, leave a comment down below, to have your notifications turned on, and you'll never miss another new video from Project Hysteria. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.